My name is Bonnie B, and you are watching The Power of Perseverance. Today, you guys, I've got the privilege of having Rick Collins with me here. He's a true leader in the legal profession and the health and wellness community. He's built an incredible reputation for integrity and a zealous advocacy representing clients nationwide and in criminal defense, as well as in the sports and fitness nutrition industry. Not only is he an expert in handling complex federal cases, but he and his firm are highly recommended by peers, clients, and opposing counsel. How often do you get recommended by opposing counsel?
It has happened. It's a good feeling when it does happen.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, your extensive background, not just in how you have supported this dietary supplement industry, which I'm a few years new to on the side of selling, producing, product development, which has been incredible for me coming from, a similar background like you've had where you have been a competitive bodybuilder and defended a few of these well-known bodybuilders as well. So this is going to be fun to dive into it. But we want to start out with, when you got into law, did you see yourself going this direction with your practice?
No. So I'm very fortunate, to have created a place, a profession, a vocation that's based on kind of my interests, my passions, what I was interested in before I was a lawyer. So I was, as you pointed out, I was a competitive bodybuilder before I ever even went to law school. So I've walked the walk in sports nutrition. I ran a personal training business for a while. Was a gym day manager in a gym. So I've always had that aspect, that part of my life. CSCS from NSCA, which is the Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist accreditation from NSCA. So that's always been part of my life. I didn't really think when I was in law school that I would ever be able to kind of blend together those interests that I have with a legal career. I went to work as a prosecutor. That's where I started in my practice. So, putting the bad guys away for robberies and, whatever kind of crime you can imagine, from the lowest levels to serious felony cases. And then I went into private practice in 1990. And I guess timing is everything in life, right? And the year that I went into private practice, Bonnie, is the same year that the United States Congress decided that anabolic steroids would become controlled substances like heroin and cocaine and methamphetamine and all the other drugs, narcotics and other drugs of abuse. So having my background in the community of people who were fit and, using whatever enhancing substances, whether it was legal ones or illegal ones, I became kind of the person who was contacted when people started getting arrested or in trouble or having questions. Suddenly steroids are like heroin or cocaine. What does that mean? What does that mean for me as a bodybuilder or as somebody who goes to the gym or a recreational athlete? So I wound up getting very involved in kind of sort of bringing together the two communities, the community of folks in the courts. Many of the officers and agents who were enforcing the laws didn't really know too much about anabolic steroids. The prosecutors didn't, other criminal defense lawyers didn't, the judges didn't. And so I was a kind of bridging that gap of information between the communities in the trenches, in the gyms, and the folks in the courts. And that just exploded the practice. And over the years since I've been in private practice, I started out doing bread and butter criminal defense, and little by little that became less and less until now. Virtually everything I do is kind of where health and fitness meet criminal or regulatory law. I like to say I'm the lawyer for the fit and jacked. So if you're either fit or you're jacked or you're both,
you are the guy.
I'm kind of the guy you have on speed dial, and I love what I do. I've gotten to represent a lot of people in the sports nutrition industry. So people who are making creatine or energy drinks or beverages or dietary supplements. I represented Sylvester Stallone's nutrition company back when he had a nutrition company.
Yeah, I saw that.
I've gotten to meet almost every famous celebrity bodybuilder and powerlifter and strength athlete. Um, the first time I met the governor, well, he was before he was the governor of California, was Arnold Schwarzenegger
Yeah.
back in 2002. So it was before he was ever governor, and having grown up at the time when he was kind of at his competitive peak, I he was an icon to me. It was like larger than life, and so I had the chance to meet him in a private meeting at the Arnold Classic a number of years ago. And I was so nervous. My hands were sweating. I was meeting this iconic figure, legendary figure, and suddenly he comes walking out, and I'm face to face with the Terminator, with the
That's
guy who
right.
killed the Predator, right? And so I'm looking at him, and he puts out his hand, and through the years, I had for friends, I had done a little impression of him,
Okay.
just as a goof. And I guess in my nervousness at the moment, it just sort of bubbled out.
Did it?
And when they introduced us, his hand went out and my hand went out, and they said, "Arnold Schwarzenegger, this is Rick Collins. Rick Collins, this is Arnold Schwarzenegger." And I said, "It's super fantastic to meet
Oh,
you."
oh
And his
goodness.
eyes got wide. He's like, "You do an impression of me?" I'm like,
Yeah.
"Yeah." He goes, "Ah, it's good." And so he laughed and I laughed. And about a year later, I actually had the chance to spend a whole afternoon with him in his office on Shatsy on Main above his restaurant. And it was just awesome. So I'm very lucky, very blessed to be able to have the practice I have. Most of my clients are good people. Some of them run afoul of this law or that law, but I tend not to represent anybody who's done anything violent or really stolen money very often from anybody else. Most of what I do involves people in the fitness community who maybe run afoul of regulatory laws or things like that. So I'm very lucky and very blessed.
As just in our conversation, I can tell why your clients love you besides your knowledge. You make people feel very comfortable. And you were talking about an interview you had where the person interviewing you was trying to be intimidating and didn't want to work with somebody that, would fear them. And that's a really amazing quality to have, especially I would think being in the industry you're in. There has to be such a sense of security and confidence, especially when you're coming to talk about a lot of these subjects that are so scrutinized, right? Steroids and the
Yeah,
perception of it and the evolution of it. Even in bodybuilding, like even now it's still not really accepted. Would you say
right.
it's better understood as a performance enhancement, but there's still like a stigma that these are
Sure.
dangerous, which are, how would you go about sharing that with people? Like, would you consider them to be dangerous? Of course, not taking them with knowledge, but for certain
Mhm.
purposes.
Well, first, I always try to put my clients at ease. Very often, many of my clients have never been arrested before. This will be their first time if it's a criminal case, and of course, I do a lot of civil work as well. But in criminal cases where somebody's arrested with a state, or very often I do a lot of federal work, it's the worst thing that could possibly happen to them. And so they are very nervous and very frightened, and they don't know what it's going to do to their potential employment future and their family. And so, yeah, I always try to treat clients the way I would want somebody in my family to be treated. And I've always applied that to my practice. And I think that's helped in a big way. In terms of kind of the history of steroids and the stigmatization of steroids, the little bit of a history lesson is that year in 1990, when steroids became criminalized as controlled substances, Schedule 3 controlled substances by Congress, was in the aftermath of a big doping scandal that happened in 1988. And that was the Seoul Olympics, where a Canadian sprinter by the name of Ben Johnson won the 100 meters, broke the records, got a gold medal, and then tested positive for Winstrol, an anabolic steroid.
I
And
remember.
he beat the American Carl Lewis, and so particularly the American sports media went ballistic, and it was like, what's going to happen to sports if this just becomes a chemistry contest, and and the Americans are going to lose because other countries have these cheating athletes that are breaking the rules of sport. What can we do? And so Congress held some hearings, and one of the main voices seeking to criminalize steroids was, interestingly, then Senator, now President Joe Biden. And so there was a big push to try to take steroids and lump them into this same control act with traditional drugs of abuse and narcotics. And the main push was by folks in sports and the sports media and sports organizations who wanted Congress to kind of do the work of policing their sports for them. Interestingly, the folks from the governmental agencies who were also called as witnesses, DEA, FDA, National Institute on Drug Abuse, and the American Medical Association, all groups that you would think would have people who would have something important, relevant to say about whether steroids should be Schedule III drugs. All of them sent witnesses to testify, do not do it. Steroids don't belong in the same law with crack and with meth. But Congress disregarded all of those experts, went with the requests of the sports communities, predominantly because of this cheating in sports aspect. Obviously, there's a secondary argument about safety, and like you may have alluded to, there's no safe drug if by safe we mean there's never going to be a side effect in any person who ever uses them. Right. There's no drug that exists that does that, right? Every drug has side effects, and very often the devil's in the dose, right? The difference between a medicine and a poison is the dose. So a little bit of red wine at night, Bonnie, maybe it's good, has a resveratrol, some flavonoids, alcohol thins the blood, maybe cardioprotective. 2 bottles of scotch a night, and very quickly you're going to see some serious medical problems. So that's all true, but that's really not why steroids were treated this way. It was because of this cheating component. And I think that the stigma of cheating, of that sort of unethical component, that link of steroids to that kind of behavior, has really poisoned the well of how the public and the courts and the medical community kind of see anabolic steroids. And I don't think steroids have ever have ever really escaped from that stigma attached to them by that association in sports.
When we met at the event in it was in California, I think, when at the What's Up event where we go to network with everybody in the supplement industry.
Yeah, Natural Products Expo.
Yeah, Natural Products. Thank you. What was interesting about running into you there and meeting you was it brought to the awareness to me how important it is when you're a new brand and these ingredients that are being put into some of these products. There's been a lot of controversy for some of these brands, and that's not even at a steroid level, but like you said, the education and how people are classifying it. And, what have you found most to be the disconnect between people understanding how they're creating their brand and their ingredients and being, legally put together versus something that really could be harmful?
Right. Well, first, there is certainly a large amount of misinformation out there about sports nutrition products. I still see in the mainstream media these reports which suggest that creatine monohydrate, a natural ingredient that's present in meat and the foods we eat, and is probably the most researched sports nutrition ingredient of all time, and has wonderful benefits for people of all ages, including geriatric populations.
Oh, it's so good for your brain.
All great, and yet you'll see the media will do these stories where they'll say creatine is it'll be a steroid story, and they'll throw creatine right in there with the steroid. So sometimes there's just no differentiation between illegal steroids or illegal drugs and what are over-the-counter dietary supplements. Probably one of the big issues right now that's a threat to the sports nutrition community is this idea that muscle building dietary supplements and dietary supplements that help you lose weight. And look, we have what? 67% obesity and
Yeah.
overweight in this country. We're not too fit as a country. That's our
No.
problem. Is not that we're going to the gym too much and watching our diet too strictly, right? And
Right.
yet there are laws being proposed in a number of states. New York, where I am, just passed a law which bans the sale of creatine and muscle building or weight loss dietary supplements to anybody under the age of 18. And so if you're a retail clerk in a vitamin store and you sell to a 17-year-old of any kind of weight loss or muscle building product other than one that's purely just protein. So if it's protein and creatine, for example, that's a violation of New York state law. New Jersey is looking to do the same thing. There have been efforts in other states to do that. And the theory behind it is really not based primarily on safety at all. It's based on the idea that the legislators have been led to believe that these products cause eating disorders in young people.
I remember when this all came out, the controversy in the news about it, and a lot of people worried about how it would affect their business. What have you seen?
Sure. No, because there's all sorts of restrictions that this can have even on online companies. So how do you know that the person that you're selling it to over your
Right.
website is 18? So you've got to create a mechanism, and that can be very expensive, to essentially proof of age verify a person at that point. But also when you deliver it, right? So, whether it's whatever carrier has to deliver that product, you now have to make sure that the person receiving it is 18 or over. And most of the commercial carriers are capable, they have an infrastructure set up for 21 because sometimes they deliver alcohol, right? You can have wine
Right.
delivered to your home, and somebody's got to be 21 or over to accept it. But 18 is not what it's built for. And so there's all these different, potential, a cascade of issues that will make it more difficult and ultimately perhaps more expensive for consumers because of these laws. And as you probably know, Bonnie, when you really look at the evidence, I'm actually doing a panel on Tuesday about this. When you really look at the hard evidence connecting these supplement products to
Right.
eating disorders, maybe there's an association. Maybe somebody who has an eating disorder may choose to use a weight loss product. I get that, but that's not cause. That's
No.
completely reversing
Right.
what's
What
going
do
on,
you call the
right?
cause? Wouldn't you say it stems from something not external food wise, right? It's got to be emotional or thought provoked.
I think all disorders, including eating disorders, are multifaceted. They're
Yeah.
complicated. There's issues of external issues. There's internal issues, and to sort of dumb it down into saying this product
Was
caused
it?
this problem is really does a disservice to the complexity and reality. Certainly there are teens with eating disorders, and we should do something to try to address those issues. But this isn't it.
Right. I mean, I've got a teenager myself, and, he took a pre workout that was given to him through a friend. He had no idea what he was taking. I just said, why didn't you just ask me? But the amount of stimulants that were in that pre workout that were sold, I could see protecting a youth or someone from a high caffeinated, overstimulant, but not something that wouldn't impact your neurological senses or, that's more tissue building. But anyways, it's interesting being a mom and hearing these things and having you talk about it. Which brings me to my next question. As someone who's contributed to chapters and textbooks, and you've written extensively for a variety of, magazines, what do you think the general public should really understand about dietary supplements and what's overlooked, and where are the best resources to really validate your information? Because with all the social media influencers and everybody is selling something on TikTok or Instagram, people are more likely to believe this influencer who may not be the most educated in what
Right.
they're presenting.
Right. Right. Well, first, I guess what we read in the media or hear very often is that supplements are unregulated, that there's no regulations in the supplement industry. And that's false, right? Supplements are regulated. There's lots of ways in which they're regulated, but they're not regulated like drugs are, right? So drugs are regulated where if I want to bring a drug to market, I've got to put it through phase 1, 2, 3 clinical trials, do a new drug application, and ultimately get the FDA to approve my drug product. So by the time it gets to the shelf, it's gone through all of those hurdles, and FDA has given a green light to it. If we were to do that with every supplement product, look at the prices we pay for prescription drugs, right? So that should
Right.
give you a hint of what it would be like to buy a bottle of vitamin C if it had to go through that sort of rigor. And so the U.S. Congress, when it enacted a law in 1994 to allow supplements to be regulated as food, not drugs, and but to have higher regulatory hurdles than ordinary food. And so supplements are regulated in many ways by both the Food and Drug Administration and by the Federal Trade Commission, which looks at the claims that are made. So if a company says this will have a drug-like effect. Let's say it'll cure your heart disease, or it'll make your cancer go away. Those are illegal drug claims. You can't make them for a supplement, and that company gets in trouble. And I've seen many companies get letters from the FTC or letters from FDA or both, who make disease claims. There are all sorts of specific labeling requirements, down to even the size of the font relative to other parts of the label and where certain information on a supplements facts panel. So if you walk into a health food store and you turn and you look at that supplement facts panel that's on your product, the placement, the order, the font size, all of that is specifically regulated by the FDA. So all of that goes part of it. What ingredients can be sold is also a factor. Now, are there some bad actors out there? Sure. In every industry, there are going to be some bad actors. But if you're a good actor, then you want to make sure that the ingredients that you're selling are okay to sell. So, and there have been problems in the sports nutrition industry. You probably remember there was a period of time when so-called pro-hormones were out on the market. So
I
these
do.
were
I remember.
steroidal precursors. Do you remember that?
I do. And people were getting into a lot of trouble.
Sure. Yeah, I represented a lot of them. So I
Yep.
probably represented more people on those pro-hormone cases than any other lawyer. So these were sort of loopholed. They weren't in the Anabolic Steroid Control Act, so they weren't specifically illegal explicitly, but they were not legal to sell as dietary supplements. And so there's a new area called SARMs, and you may be
Yeah.
familiar with that's an acronym for selective androgen receptor modulators. So these are muscle building anabolic substances. They're not steroids. They're not steroidal in configuration, but they can have some of the anabolic effects that steroids have. They're synthetic. They don't meet the definition of a dietary ingredient. They can't be sold as dietary ingredients. But they were on the market, and you see them on the market. And I've represented people who've gotten in trouble for selling them, including people who didn't really know that they were illegal, and were like, well, my distributor, I'm a retailer. My distributor said these are fine. I look online, everybody else is selling them. I go to another health food store. They're on the shelves there. I thought it was okay, but it's not okay. And you can get in trouble. So due diligence is super important if you're going to be in this industry.
Totally agreed. There was a time I was working in product development and saw some of these. I didn't know it went through so much to be approved, and how smart that is for any new brand starting out in the industry. I would imagine there's some that don't, just because of the cost of doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, unfortunately, the costs are much greater by not doing it, right? So,
Yeah.
you could pay a good lawyer who knows the industry and can help you set it up right a little, or you can do it yourself, screw it all up, have the FDA or other agencies or a class action lawyer or others who look at this industry to come after it. And then you're going to wind up paying a lot to a lawyer to fix the problem, and
Yeah.
possibly a lot to, a class action lawyer as a settlement. So, and I've seen, class action work has become, kind of like a big thing in the supplement industry now, where lawyers basically go to health food stores or websites and they look for products that are in some way arguably inappropriate. So maybe they'll test the product and find that, oh, wait a minute, it says 30 grams of protein, but it only had 27 grams. And I've tested it out at 27 or 26, and my client paid for 30 and you only gave them 26. We're suing on behalf of all the customers who ever bought your product for that shortfall. I've seen these cases. I've seen cases involving website compliance. So if a visually impaired person goes to a website, tries to buy your product, and the website is not set up to be accessible to a visually impaired person, a class action lawyer sends a notice to the company and says, my client can't see, went to your website, tried to order your product, and did not get all of the information that a sighted person would have had. So all of these things are ways that you want to make sure, if you are jumping into this industry, it's not like selling jeans or shirts where, you can sell it and there's no real regulatory components to it. What happens if a customer takes your energy drink, your fat burner product, and then calls the company, the number on your bottle, and says, my heart is racing. I'm on the way to the hospital. I don't feel well, and I just took your product. You need to have standard operating procedures for how to deal with an adverse event like that. So there's all these ways in which the industry is regulated, and it's important for any company that's in sports nutrition or in natural products, other dietary supplement products, to really get legal advice on the front end rather than finding out on the back end. So, everything is a problem when it becomes a problem, and not a problem until it is, I guess. So, and by peptides, there's a whole lot of different substances there which have different potential legal risks to them. So some of the peptides are approved drugs. They're FDA approved products, and so prescribing them, has less of an issue than would exist with peptides that are not approved. I've seen peptides sold on websites where they're sold not for human consumption. In other words, for research purposes only, under circumstances where it's obvious that that's really just a ruse and that they're actually being sold for people to affect the structure or function of their bodies, which is how a drug is defined. And so in those situations, I've represented clients who were charged with fraud and the fraud is on the Food and Drug Administration, because you're saying it's a research chemical not for human use, but you're shipping it to a college dorm, ordered from a website, ordered from an email address called youngandjacked at Gmail. And,
You've
it's
got
in
to go get a
small.
money order and you have to mail it,
Right.
and it can't be
So
like,
you get the idea. So I see
yeah,
a lot of that. For doctors that are prescribing peptides, that's a huge thing. And I know doctors who are doing it, and I know people who are on different peptides and they love them. And
yeah,
they're really, they appear to have huge beneficial potential. The FDA, on the other hand, would say that in order to prescribe a drug, that drug should be an approved drug and has to have some track record of safety. And some of these peptides, there's some anecdotal evidence, there's some studies to support them, but not the kind of phase 1, 2, or 3 clinical trials that would result in an FDA approval. So from FDA's standpoint, some of those are misbranded unapproved drugs. And if a physician's prescribing them, that physician should want to look also at their malpractice policy, because very often there's an exclusion for prescribing unapproved drugs, which would mean that if somebody, for whatever, and maybe these drugs are super safe and there's no issue, but if somebody claims they had an issue with one of them or actually does have an issue and they sue, and the doctor says, well, I'd like my insurance carrier to cover this claim, the insurance carrier may very well say, well, look at this provision, we're not covering you for this, so you've got to hire your own lawyer and pay your own settlement if that's where it goes.
So protect yourself and do it right the first time. There you go.
Great advice. Spoken like a true lawyer, Bonnie.
Yeah, right. I knew I went into the wrong career choice. What's really interesting is I remember when the film Bigger, Stronger, Faster came out, and it put out a lot of information, and I love the journey that the guy took us all on about that. How do you think the media representation of that in the supplement industry, created for the public since then, when that came out?
Yeah. So, and I stay in touch with Chris Bell, who was the director of the movie. He and I worked on that I was involved in that project from the very beginning. We've had some talks even recently about a sequel to it, but yeah, I think that was one of the first really provocative movies that looked at anabolic steroids through a lens other than this will cause roid rage. Your liver's going to fall out. You're going to die in a day. That kind of thing, and was much more nuanced and kind of showed the good and the bad, and the a much more contextualized presentation, right? So when people say, well, are steroids good or bad? We live in a society now where people just want to simplify it. It's either good or bad, right? Are you team red or team blue? It's one or the other. And there's very little nuance and very little context. I think most things are not that way. Most are, a little more complicated than that, right? So steroids for a 16-year-old who's going to use them in his basement without any supervision, products that he bought over social media that were made in somebody's basement, I think we could all agree bad. That's not a good thing. We all want to prevent that from happening. On the other hand, a person with HIV wasting who is suffering from sarcopenia and is losing muscle mass, steroids were a godsend to the AIDS population, and as was growth hormone, and really saved lives. So, and certainly steroids have uses in medicine. For a guy who's maybe 40 or 50 or 60, whose testosterone levels are dropping, and maybe he's symptomatic and he's not feeling good and he's got no drive, and he's, goes to his doctor and says, what can I do? And the doctor tests him and sees that his testosterone levels are way, way down. Testosterone, which is the primary anabolic steroid, right? The granddaddy of all the synthetic anabolic steroids. So that can be great for that guy under a doctor's supervision. I think the question that in the fitness community we wrestle with is, well, what about somebody who is not having medical need, but wants to use steroids for physical enhancement? It's really cosmetic. I mean, bottom line is.
Right.
And when we talk about the Ben Johnson circling back, well, steroids in sports gets the media attention, but the overwhelming majority of guys, and it's mostly guys, but women too, but the overwhelming majority of non-medical users are cosmetic users. They are using it in the way that others might use liposuction, Botox, fillers, you name it, right? It's a cosmetic tool so that you arguably seek to look better than you did before them, right? So that's really, I think 85% of users in studies are people who've never competed in any physical sport, since, Little League, right? So the question becomes, is that okay or is that not okay? And that's an ethical question, right? So, our society and through our laws has said it's not okay. So if a person goes to their doctor and says, doc, I feel fine, I look okay, but I'm spending time in the gym. I'm there 4 or 5 days a week. I don't feel like I used to. I don't have the same response. I'm not getting any bigger. Maybe I'm losing a little size. I'm getting older. I'm getting weaker. Or I just want to be better. I want to add more muscle to my chest. I want to look better when I go to the beach in Cancun
Right.
and take off my shirt and people will ooh and ah, right? So the doctor, by today's law, says, get out of my office. You can't, that would be a felony for me to prescribe it for a non medical reason. And that is the law. But the doctor can say, but, okay, I can give you some pec implants, which will, puff out your chest. I have bicep implants, which I can, and tricep implants, calf implants. I can do liposuction to make your abs look better, subjecting you to the risks of general anesthesia, infection, potential death on the table. I can do all of those things, but I can't use a natural hormone, which is already present in your body, like testosterone, to accomplish the same ends. And okay, every drug has side effects, but it could be argued that subjecting oneself to all those surgical procedures may be more risky than a carefully controlled, supervised, monitored use of a cycle of steroids for the purposes of physical enhancement. So we've made the decision not to do that, but it is interesting that we allow people to do all those other things, and we would be offended about. Could you imagine if somebody said, "Well, look, a woman wants breast augmentation. She wants to, do breast implants for no other reason than she wants to feel better about the way she
Right.
looks."
Right.
It would be insulting to think that there would be some restriction on that. And yet, the guy who goes in and says, I want steroids for that purpose, is told you're vain, just get used to the way you look,
It's
be
the
happy
double
the way you are,
standard.
there's something wrong with you, you have muscle dysmorphia, and it would be a felony, so get out of my office. So these are some interesting ethical issues that I think as a society we don't talk about enough. And in the fitness community, people have strong feelings one way or the other, and I have a lot of my clients are like, yeah, Rick is our champion. He's in favor of freedom and liberty and personal autonomy. And there were other people who were like, oh, this is terrible. And it's, well, I'm not so sure it's terrible. I think there are reasons why, drugs of any kind, including steroids, should be in the hands of doctors in a safe, controlled way that is not using black market products that
Right.
somebody made in their house and is not going to kids and is not going to be used in excessive doses. Because look, steroids can cause blood pressure rise in some people, and so there's some cardiac risks. Although testosterone replacement therapy is actually cardioprotective based on an abundance of science, even though FDA continues to claim that it's bad for the heart in most people, which is not what the science says. But these are interesting ethical issues, and Bonnie, I could talk about them
Totally.
all day, because these things interest and fascinate me.
But I have to ask because I'm familiar with the whole Balco thing
Mm-hmm.
and with the players. Touch on that for the listeners, how you played a part in that.
Sure. So, for those who don't remember, it was a little over 20 years ago that there was a huge doping scandal involving a sports performance place in the San Francisco area, in the Bay Area, called the Bay Area Laboratory Cooperative, Balco, short for that. And a guy was running it who was catering to elite level athletes that included Barry Bonds and Marion
Hmm.
Jones and Tim Montgomery and many others. And it was a scandal when it was discovered that part of the program involved performance enhancing drugs. and regimens of these drugs to these players in violation of sports. I represented the chemist in that case. And that was a guy who had created a product called the Clear. And some people may remember that scandal, and the Clear was in all the
Yeah.
newspapers at the time. The Clear was actually a hybridized molecule, a steroid molecule that it was THG, tetrahydrogestrinone. And because it was a newly created molecule by the chemist, there was no standard by which to determine it and detect it. So it'd be like a fingerprint that you find a latent fingerprint, but you don't have the person's fingerprints on file, so you can't make an identification of exactly what it is. And so I represented the chemist in that case. It got a lot of notoriety. It probably led to a lot of other cases. I wound up getting a lot of cases, high profile steroid cases,
Yeah.
cases around the country. And so, what is the legacy of the Balco case? Well, there are those who would say that cheating in sports through drugs was not solved by the Anabolic Steroid Control Act in 1990, because Balco was many years after that. And, if the purpose of that law was to get steroids out of sports, there was Balco, there was Lance Armstrong. I mean, we could go
Right.
through the
Right.
scandals that have occurred. So steroids are not out of sports. But I've represented a lot of people whose lives have been derailed because they were arrested for steroids. And I've represented personal users, somebody who's just made the decision that they're going to use steroids. They understand it's a violation of the law, but maybe they went to their doctor and their doctor threw them out, like we've talked about before. And when that happens, if 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 there's a sufficient demand, there will be supply. Basic economic law, right? So
Right.
they go to the black market and they get the drugs off the black market, and they use them, and that makes them a criminal under the laws of most states and federal law. So I represent a lot of those people. They're gainfully employed people. Many have families, wives, kids. They're doing the right thing in society. Is using steroids in that context vanity? Maybe, arguably anything that you do to really, enhance the way you look could be argued to be, superficial or vain. Maybe we're a society that puts too much emphasis on how we look, and we should spend more time thinking about who we are and how we are on the inside rather than the outside. But that's probably not realistic in today's world of social media.
Right.
So,
A lot of external.
unfortunately, that's where we are.
Through the years of your experience and the type of people and the variety of cases you've had, I would imagine, and I personally would think if it was me, have you ever thought, gosh, is this person really innocent, and you still represented them based off of like a personal ethical reason? Like, have you ever had that, and then, or been in the middle of something in one of your cases and thought, gosh, they're guilty, but I still have to represent them as innocent?
I'll tell you one quick story, Bonnie, and I'll try to make it as quick as I can. I was contacted by a female bodybuilder out west many years ago. And she was arrested in a western state for selling one single vial of testosterone cypionate to a snitch, an undercover guy working
Mm-hmm.
for the feds or for the state. And she's like, I didn't do it. I'm 100% innocent. And they're offering me a deal that if I plead guilty, they'll give me no prison. It'll just be probation. But I've never been in trouble before, and I'm not pleading guilty to something I did not do. I will not do it. And so I said, okay. She said, but they are saying if I go to trial and I lose, it's mandatory that I get 10 years in prison.
Wow.
So I called up the prosecutor on the case and I said, what's going on here? He said, she's lying to you. She's guilty as the day is long. There's an undercover who goes in. He talks with her. She sells him a vial that's hidden in a dietary supplement product bottle, which she put in there. He walks out with it. He gives it to the undercover cop. The day before, he was on the phone with her and he set up the transaction. It wasn't recorded, but he, after that call, he then went to the agent that he's working with, and then 3 weeks later they go to her house and they find steroids in her house. So the call, the transaction, and the steroids in the house were in a three strikes law
Mm.
state, and so she's looking at three strikes and you're out for the three separate drug related events, and so she gets 10 years in prison if she goes to trial and loses. I will give her probation. I'm not looking to put her in prison, but she's got to admit to the felony. She says, not doing it. I didn't do it. He's lying. I didn't do anything wrong. And so I jumped on a plane and I flew out to that state. And that was a state that allowed for two things that were good. One was they allowed for depositions before trial, which doesn't happen in criminal cases in most states. It means that I can talk to the snitch and question him before the trial, get
Oh,
an
interesting.
idea to measure him.
Okay.
The second thing was they provide you with discovery, and most states provide discovery. So as a defense lawyer, you can see the evidence or hear the evidence before the case really goes to trial. So I heard the tape of the conversation of the transaction inside her personal training facility. So I listened to it many, many times. I flew out there and long story short, I cross-examined the snitch and was able to determine that he didn't realize. Yes, it's true they had a conversation the day before, but the conversation was about, he claimed it was drug related. It's not recorded. I suspect he just said, I'm going to come to your gym tomorrow. And can you sell me a bottle of vitamins?
Right.
The next day at the gym, they have a conversation. He asks her at one point, what about steroids? And she says, well, and she was a high level ranking competitive bodybuilder. So visually, you would think she was muscular, right? So
Right.
in front of a jury, there might be some issues there, right? But she says, well, bodybuilders use steroids. I don't recommend them at an early age. He then says, well, what about that bottle of vitamins we talked about yesterday? She says, oh, okay. And then you hear, as he comes to the counter, you hear as they take, he gives her some money and he leaves. But what he didn't realize is, and I asked him, after you got this bottle that supposedly had testosterone in it, you brought it directly out to the cop that you were working with, right? Oh, yes. Because you understand that's the evidence in the case, right? Yes. That's the contraband. Yes, yes. You didn't go anywhere else, did you? Well, I had to go to the bathroom. Wait a minute. You had to go to the bathroom so bad that you couldn't wait 5 minutes to give the important evidence to the cop? Yeah, I had to go so
Oh,
bad. I had to go so bad. Number one or number two? He goes, number one. Okay, so your bladder was so full that you couldn't wait just a few minutes? No, I had to go so bad. He didn't realize, idiot that he was, that the tape, the recording, was running the entire time. And you hear as he goes in the bathroom, puts his keys on the sink,
no.
you hear the rustling of the cellophane of the vitamin bottle, and you hear the scooping out of the tablets as they hit the porcelain bowl, as he scoops out enough to be able to take that vial wherever he had hidden on his person, put it in there, and then bring it out to the undercover.
Tried to frame her.
It was an absolute frame. And he insisted that he paid her $100 for the steroids and the vitamin bottle. What he didn't realize, and I asked him, well, she didn't ring it up in the cash register, right? No, because nobody's going to ring up a drug transaction in
Right.
their register.
Right.
He didn't realize she had provided me with a time coded receipt. $20 is what he paid for it. So he was just lying, absolutely lying. And in there are moments as lawyers that we're so grateful to have the skill set that we do to be able to uncover a frame like that. I mean, she was an absolutely 100% innocent person
Right.
who could have gone to prison for 10 years for something that she didn't do. And we remain friends on social media all these years later, expresses thanks to me all the time. And the steroids in the house were not hers. They were her husband's. He was a competitive powerlifter also. And that was a personal use situation anyway. So the prosecutor, after all this came out and it was clear that the confidential informant was lying, looks at me and says, "Would you take a misdemeanor?" I said, "Okay. Now let me explain how this is going to go. You're going to dismiss all of these charges, and I'm going to go try to convince her not to sue you for the insanity of this case." And he said, "Okay, I could live with that." And that was the end of the case.
I love that.
Life is about kind of balancing sort of the, gratitude for what you have and the desire to have more, right? Because if you're completely happy with everything in life, then you become complacent and you really don't do much. On the other hand, if you're constantly looking for more and you're never happy, and there are people who are just never acknowledging what they have, it's always what they don't have. To me, that's an imbalance. So, I think starting the day with gratitude, ending your day with gratitude, being thankful for, I like Liam Neeson says in Taken, I have a very particular set of skills, right? So to have those skills and to be able to apply them and by just good fortune, and I don't profess to be the brilliant architect of this. It was just timing and good fortune was that I had a base of knowledge and a place in the fitness community and a knowledge of the fitness aspects of the subject matter. And I also had, from 5 years as a prosecutor and years as a criminal defense lawyer, the skill set to be able to know how to use that knowledge to benefit a client in a courtroom proceeding, whether it's civil or criminal, to have that, to be fortunate enough to have that combination. And through the years, I've tried to find a protege to, at some point in many years from now, I may decide I want to spend more time, I don't want to be Rick Collins anymore. I want to, just enjoy myself. And, but it's hard to find somebody with the passion, the knowledge base who wants to do it. There's probably more lucrative areas of law. I try to make my services affordable to those who need it. But I get up in the morning, Bonnie. I'm grateful for the life that I have. I never really saw that this would be what it would be like in law school. Maybe I thought I'd be a bread and butter criminal defense lawyer or maybe a prosecutor for a career. This was way better.
It has been an honor to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you like what you heard, please share it and help us keep the conversation going. We can't grow without you. So, thank you in advance for your support of Power of Perseverance.